Hey everybody, Pastor Mark here. Welcome. You ready to do some Bible time? Welcome to Bible time. And if you joined us last week, you know we are going to walk through the book at least of 1 Thessalonians. And so today we're going to be in chapter 2 of 1 Thessalonians. So grab your Bible or your phone or your computer or however, because we're going to be in chapter 2 there. Introductory thought before we read the chapter. Do you know anyone who has a knack for leading people to Jesus or drawing people toward God, maybe inviting them to church, but ultimately, do you know anybody who seems to have a knack or gifting to move people towards Christ? I thought of a few people in my life. One of them, Jim B. He's a pastor, and I've done meetings with him, kind of a leader in the vineyard. And it's not uncommon to, it's like, okay, 1 o'clock, we're at a conference, and Jim B. is supposed to be in the meeting. And I'll look around and I'll think, well, where the heck is Jim? And Jim will come in 20 minutes late, and you'll go, hey, man, where you been? And he will say, oh, sorry I'm late, man. I was leading at lunch, I ended up in a conversation with my server. And so I just, we were just praying so that she could know Jesus. Is it okay if I'm late? He was just that guy. Now you would think, and that was not a one-time thing. He just regularly was, oh, by the way, he'd have somebody, anyway. Just so I thought of him. I thought of a friend of mine named Clint, who when Clint first came to the church, our church was just little bitty, maybe 30 or 40 people. And then in several months, looked around and there was like 70 or 80 people. And a bunch of those people, if you'd say, hi, how did you hear about the church? Clint was part of their story. And he regularly leads people to Christ. I was actually talking to Clint earlier today, and he was talking about some people that have come to Christ around him. A new one on my list, his name's Thomas. And just this last week, Thomas invited like 12 guys to a meeting. And we had a men's thing, and I think 2 of those guys prayed commitments to Christ. And so I thought of Thomas. I thought of another woman, I can't think of her name right now, but she was in a group that I was in for a while. And I noticed often she would be with somebody, and as she would introduce them, she would say something like, oh, and this is Terry. And she'd say a little bit about Terry. And Terry just recently became a Christian. And after a while, I thought, you're leading these people to Christ, aren't you? Do you know anybody like that? Here's the question. How do they do that? Because if you're like me, I'd like to be used by God to help someone know Jesus and be forgiven for their sin and go to heaven and be helped in this life and eternity, live with God and avoid hell. And that seems like a good mission. Pause, consider, if you would. Think of some people in your life right now, and your best guess, right now, man, that person would so benefit from a relationship with Jesus. Or you acknowledge they are far from God. Or maybe they're really a nice person, but they're not a forgiven person, which becomes a problem with all eternity. Wouldn't it be good to be a person who had more skills in inviting or including or something so that person could go to heaven and know Jesus and be helped? So with that thought, that's where we're going to head in chapter 2 of Thessalonians, because I like this chapter 2. It gives us insight into the writer of the book. His name is Paul, and he was a guy who led hundreds, probably thousands, tens of thousands maybe, of people to Christ personally. And not only did Paul, he started approximately 20 churches. And by the way, when he started a church, that's different than starting a church now in America, where most people have some background or have heard of the Bible or Jesus. He was going out into places where they knew nothing about Jesus, and people would end up falling in love with Jesus and giving their life to him. And in chapter 2, we're going to get into his head, because he is going to talk about when he visited the Thessalonians, and he's going to talk about when I came to you, here's how I came to you, and it produced faith in them. Does that make sense? All right, so we're in chapter 2. We're going to read, I probably will stop about verse 8 or so, but here's what it says. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. Now, my interpretation of that is when we visited you, you came to Jesus. It produced spiritual fruit in your life. Our visit to you was not without results. And then he goes on to describe, in my idea, his approach. He says, we had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dare tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, we're going to talk about that, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. Some more about Paul's approach. You know, we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Now, you can read some more in the chapter, and there's actually more insights to Paul's approach to evangelism. But what I want to do is just highlight 4 things I see. I actually think, and you may want to do this, there are probably like 12 things that we could highlight about Paul's approach to evangelism, but I know you won't listen to me for that long. So I'm going to hit 4 of them. So let me pray, and I'm going to give you basically 4 insights to effective evangelism. And so with people in our minds that we'd like to help, let's pray. God, I pray ultimately for those of us involved in this Bible time, plant some things in us, remind us of things that ultimately people would go to heaven because of the next minutes that we're gathered around your word. And more than just, help this more to be more than just information. Will you empower us? Most of us, we really do want to make a difference. So help us. In Jesus' name, amen. So I've got 4 ideas that will help us be part of a team of people sometimes that will help lead someone to Christ. First thing is this, and there's some fill in the blanks. Effective evangelism assumes opposition. It just assumes that it's not going to be easy all the time. In verse 2, Paul acknowledges early on, he says, with the help of our God, we dare to tell you his gospel in the face of, he lists this as strong opposition. So this is just a simple point or reminder. There is, I want to say always, virtually always, whenever we try to introduce Christ with someone, there's some resistance. I could only think, I've been a Christian now for like 100 years, and I can only think of one person that I was there when they came to Christ that it really was, it was so easy. His name was Darren. And he came to church one time, and I said, and after service, I did an altar call, and he came up and I said, so would you like to be a Christian? And he said, yeah. That was it. He just said, yeah. And then he prayed. It was like God had totally set him up. That does not happen all the time. Usually there's some questions, or there's a struggle, or some emotional, like, oh, I'm a little afraid, or there's more like that kind of stuff. Almost never do you walk up to someone and say, hi, my name's Phyllis. Would you like to know Jesus? And then the person just says, well, yeah, sure. That just is not most of the time. How it works for me is there's moments of resistance where I have to decide, am I going to keep pressing this or offering things, or am I going to pull back? This happened just Monday night. I was golfing. I'm golfing with a group of not church guys. I think some of them go to church, but not people connected to the church. And so this year I get to golf with them on Monday nights. It's a joy and a lot of fun to get to know some of these guys. So we were on one of the holes, and Tim, great guy, I'm getting to know him a little bit, he brought up some questions about ministry. And long story short, there on hole 16 or whatever it was, a spiritual conversation broke out. I shared a little bit about the gospel. I said, well, this and that. And one of the things I remember thinking, as 3 of us out of 4 were talking, I remember thinking, oh, the one guy over there, he's being silent. And you know what my brain went to? I wonder if is he not liking this? Because I'm on their turf. Like, it's their golf clubby kind of a thing. And I remember thinking, will I be quiet just because it feels like maybe that guy doesn't like this conversation? Now, ultimately, I think he was okay, but I remember at that point thinking, resistance. Should I pull back? Should I? And what I'm saying to us as people who want to be helpful, when those resistance moments may be perceived, real or not, an evangelist, a person who cares, will realize that's just part of the deal. Keep sharing, keep talking, keep offering Christ. By the way, sometimes the resistance is really clear. Some years ago, I was shopping for some clothes, and somehow God came up, or the gospel came up, and I interjected a phrase that I use quite often, which was, oh, when I was 20 years old, I became a Christian, and it changed my life. I've said that phrase a lot. That's just part of my start a conversation. Someone will ask about life or something. And when I interjected that into the conversation this time at this clothing store, I remember one person jumping into the conversation, and they said, wait a minute, you actually believe that stuff? And they said it with irritation and disdain. And they said to somebody else in the store, like, hey, Phil, this guy actually believes there's a God. And I remember there was some pushback in that. Here's what I would say most of the time. God bless our country or whatever. I rarely get real pushback. No one's punching me or anything. And by the way, if we get back to Thessalonians, Paul, there are times when we feel pushback. Paul, I don't even know if he would include that as opposition to the gospel. Paul, here's an insight into what Paul, when he's talking about opposition, in 2 Corinthians 11:24, here's some of the things that Paul has been through. He lists 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. So 5 times he was whipped, 39 times. Verse 25 says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was pelted with stones. In verse 26 from 2 Corinthians 11, he says, I've been in danger from bandits, in danger from fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, in danger from false believers. So that's opposition. And so I share that just to remind us, when we feel those little pushbacks, just keep going. That's what someone who's going to be used by God to do evangelism will just keep going. Keep pushing. Keep pushing. And when I thought about that, I was reminded of John 3:3. This is, I think, important or insightful to me. In John 3, when Jesus talked to Nicodemus, he said to Nicodemus, very truly I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again. Now let me just make an illustration quickly. Getting born means somebody has to push in the physical, natural realm. Now, you may have heard me talk about this before. Does that make sense? All the ladies know what I'm talking about if you've given birth. Someone has to decide to get this baby into life. Someone is going to have to push. And there are times in that birthing process where I'm sure it feels like the resistance is too strong. There's no way. This should not happen. Somebody has to be the one who the doctor or the coach that says, look here, you got to keep pushing. So be that person. So the first idea from the text is effective evangelism assumes that there'll be some opposition and pushes through it. Let's hit number 2. Number 2 comes from verse 3, where Paul says, for the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. Now that's interesting. So I've made the fill in the blank here. Effective evangelism authentically presents. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but there's a sense of, if we're going to be good at inviting people to know Jesus and pushing and all those things, let's try to stay authentic and honest and be real in the midst of it. So I have 2 ways that plays out in my life. The first one that you can fill in is offer Jesus because we love people. I think that'll raise the authenticity. Like, really just love the people. We're talking about motives here. Back in the verse it says, right, it does not spring from error, impure motives. A great motive is, I'm going to talk to you about Jesus or invite you to church because I love you. Just this morning, I had a breakfast meeting, and Beth was our server. And we ended up in a conversation. What happened? I remember now. She had just made fresh squeezed orange juice, and so I ordered some. And she was talking about the work involved in squeezing those oranges. And so I said, well, I want a glass of orange juice then. So anyway, I won't bore you with the details, but she ended up talking about, her arms getting strong, and she's been working out, and she lost 50 pounds. And she shared some stuff about her life, and she's hoping to have a baby. And anyway, I ended up interjecting into her. I said, Beth, can we just pray? Can we just pause? Can I pray for you for a minute? That sounds exciting. But long story short, when we interact with people like that, it would be best for opening the spiritual door and having spiritual authority over people's life if deep down I was talking to Beth because I loved her with a godly kind of love. Like, does that make sense? Like, that's a pretty good motive. By the way, if you want God to give you more authority and power in your life, great prayer, ask the Lord to make you a person who loves other people well, because then he can trust you with the Holy Spirit's power. That was a little tangent there. But that kind of a motive helps us when we're trying to share Christ with people. Before I offer another thing here in this authentically, I do want to challenge you. Don't wait until all your motives are perfect. Don't wait until I perfectly love Beth to try to invite her to church. Because if you wait for perfect motives, you're probably never going to get there. We'll spend the rest of our life just working on our motives instead of actually trying to impact the world. And there is a verse in Philippians 1 that I learned really early on in my Christian walk that has stuck with me. Because I guess it was so striking even from early on. This again is from Paul, who we're learning from in 1 Thessalonians. Let's see. Beginning in verse 14, it's a lot of verses, but this is Bible time, so hang in there. Paul says, "And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have been confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear." So the setting is, he's talking about people who are sharing the gospel. And then he says, it's true, he's going to talk about motives. It's true that some people preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. Do you see this? If you're looking at the verse, he's assessing people's motives, and he's like, some people have good motives, some have great motives, some have bad motives. He says, the latter, those with good motives, do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing they can stir up trouble for me. Here's the verse, though, that just got me when I was 20 years old and thought, well, maybe I should try to help other people. It says, Paul says, but what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. Boom. Mic drop. Whatever. The most important thing is that we talk about Jesus. Don't wait for our motives to be perfect. If I waited for my Bible time to be perfect before we did this, we would never have a Bible time ever. Because perfection ain't going to happen. And so, does that make sense? So, authentically presents. So that's offer Jesus because we love. The other one under authentically presents, it's the second fill in the blank under the second point. Offer Jesus without hiding something. I'm going to try to sneak this in. This to me has to do with the second part of verse 3 where it says, nor are we trying to trick you. Simple point. Offer Jesus without hiding something. So as we have conversations with our moms and our dads and our sisters and our brothers and people at work, if they bring up some concern about what it would be like to follow Jesus, try to be authentic. So if they say, well, if I give my life to God, is he going to make me give money? Stay honest in your conversation with them, if that makes sense. Don't go, oh no. Yeah, money has nothing to do with God. Because if you overstate it, then it's like we're falsely selling something. So let me give you another example. Well, if I become a Christian, will I have to teach my children that Santa Claus isn't really real because I knew a Christian and like they said that you can't really, if you're a Christian, you can't tell your kids that Santa Claus is real. And so if somebody has these authentic concerns, somewhere in there, try to be honest with them. So if they say, well, I just like to have sex with a bunch of people. If I become a Christian, will I have to adjust my moral life? Do not tell them, no, your moral life has nothing to do, because that's a lie. Does that make sense? Now, this is not easy. There's a tension here. But if they ask a question about what it's like to follow Jesus, don't shy away from the reality of, God will get involved in our life. Does that make any sense? I think sometimes we make a mistake by overstating things like, God loves you just the way you are. Oh, you just come to Jesus and it's all on Him. If you never change anything in your life, it doesn't matter because God just loves you. And that's not Christianity. Part of Christianity, as we get to know Him, is God starts poking around in our life and saying, stop that. Or He says, start that. Or He says, yes, I'm going to call you to be generous. So one of the ways that I do that is I will tell people, yes, that matters. Yes, that could happen. But I try to steer them toward, but the most important thing is the right now, here and now. So don't get all caught up on whether God will make you, let's narrow it down to right here, my friend. Let's talk about you. Would you like to know Jesus Christ? Would you like to have a relationship with God? Would you like to be forgiven for your sin? That's the most important thing. But try not to lie about what might come after that. Okay? We're talking about motives here. So effective evangelism, authentically presents. So we got two more. Let's hit number 3. Effective evangelism doesn't we're getting 2 for 1 in this. Doesn't flatter and isn't greedy. That's all from verse 5. Paul, he's describing his approach to the Thessalonians. He says, you know that we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. I'm going to try to hit these quickly. So, from what he says here, don't try to flatter people into the kingdom of God. So don't say, wow, hey girl, you look beautiful today. And then and then say, so, now do you want to pray this prayer? Or something in there. There's a motive thing. So that's just a real quick. Don't over flatter people, just try to manipulate them into the kingdom of God. He mentions that. That's good. So what about greedy? I guess, in my understanding back in the time of Paul writing this, there were some people who would take on spiritual leadership in places, and then they would target richer people, and they would try to get the richer people to become followers, or even those that may not have been rich, but their motive underneath it was, I want you to become a follower of Jesus because followers of Jesus are generous, and I want you to be generous to me. And I'm not going to talk about this a lot because this feels really icky to me, but don't do that. And I'll do one tangent here to wrap this up. I think, depending on what circles you run in, money gets way too wrapped up in the presentation of the gospel. And by the way, this is one of I'm talking to Blake and Ryan who are in the room with me, but one of the things I hear from non-Christians a lot is, their perception is, well, the church only wants our money. Or you guys ever hear that stuff? And so, is money important? Yes, we need to be authentic and not tell people that, oh no, God never cares about whether you're generous or not or giving. But the kingdom of God is not primarily about money. I had a conversation years ago with a family member of mine who was trying to get me into a multi-level marketing thing. I think it was the Amway thing. And part of his presentation to me, and he knew I was a Christian, he started to describe making all this money in this organization. And then he said something like this, Mark, now just think of how much ministry you could move forward if you were making $100,000 a year. To which I intervened in the conversation and said something like, you need to stop what you're saying. Ministry is not mostly about me having money. Ministry is mostly about me caring about people. And he didn't, by the way, I didn't get into I didn't follow his sales pitch. But I remember feeling a little twisted. Like, whoa, dude, do not think what the world needs right now is more money. By the way, if you make money and if you have money, we should be generous. Money can impact people, all that kind of stuff. But primarily, people who move the kingdom forward have a heart for people. People, if you're going to lead your friend to Christ, yes, you can use some money, buy their dinner, be generous, whatever. Mostly, you know what that person needs from you? Time, caring, your heart, answer questions. You cannot, I don't know, thinking with you guys, I don't think you can't pay somebody to become a Christian. Well, I suppose, but it wouldn't work. Like, I'll give you $50 if you pray this prayer. Like, oh, okay, I'll pray the prayer. But it's not mostly about money. And Paul, the writer of Thessalonians, right, the effective evangelist, here's what he said, and I think it was helpful to me. Philippians 4:11, Paul says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. Paul says of himself, this great evangelist, I know what it's like to be in need, and I know what it's like to have plenty. But I think he downplays that. He says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, he says. I don't think Paul was just not driven by the money thing. He's like, yeah, if I've got some, that's great. If I don't have some, that's great. Contentment is a great perspective for an evangelist. So the number 3 was effective evangelism doesn't flatter and isn't greedy. One more point. Hang in there. This one I think will come pretty naturally to us. The last thing I see about Paul is he cares deeply. Effective evangelism cares deeply. This comes from the last couple verses we read. 7, it says, instead, we were like young children among you, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. This is a big deal. This is similar to the love side we talked at the beginning. This word care, it is, by the way, in another version of the Bible, it says, but we proved to be gentle among you. If you're highlighting in your Bible, can I tell you, I think that gentleness opens a door to spiritual conversations. Because Paul says we prove to be gentle among you as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. That word used there, one of the words here is thalpo. It means to warm, cherish, nourish, foster, comfort. Be that, if that's up on the screen now, be that person, it'll open a door to spiritual conversations. Be that warm, cherish, nourish, foster, comfort. That will open a door. One of the words used in the description was brood, which made me think of chickens. And there's also a scripture in Psalm 91. I don't have it in our notes, but it says, what's it say? He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Surely He will save you from the fowler's snare and from the deadly pestilence. It goes on to say, under His wings you will find refuge. And so part of this picture of care is probably appropriately like a bird saying, come here, you guys, come here, come on. And in the midst of danger or whatever, covering them under their wings. And an effective evangelist or person who can move people, I think, regularly, whether physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, says, come here, come here, come here, Blake, come here, right, come here, man, and does this, bring it in. Be a person that looks into the world and sees some of the challenges and bring it in. Does that bring it in? And so my last thoughts regarding this care deeply, I'm going to give you 7, these were kind of as I came, 7 closing ideas regarding caring. All right? I'll hit them quick. Here it is. Get ready to write them down. Capitalize on touch. Capitalize on touch. Be a person that shakes hands, pats on the back. Don't underestimate the power of God in you to affect the person on the other side. These guys I'm golfing with on Monday nights, who I just like them. I'm working hard at every time we get together. I'm trying to fist bump. I'm trying to shake their hand. This last time I patted a guy on the back. I think that the human touch can be powerful. So capitalize on touch. How much time do we have? Oh, we're going long. Jesus was a toucher. Read Mark 7:32. This was part of a guy's healing. This was in my Bible time 2 days ago. It says, some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. That's worth noticing. Touch him, Jesus. And after he took him aside away from the crowd, here's what Jesus did. You talk about not a lot of personal space. It says Jesus put his fingers into the man's ear. Ryan, have you thought about this? He put his fingers into the man's ears, and then he spit and touched the man's tongue. So he spit and touched it. You talk about low barrier for personal space. Like some of us who are COVID sensitive right now would be like, oh, you got to be kidding me. I can't believe it. But I just share that. Jesus, I don't know, just like it was amazing to me. It made me go, oh, whoa. Putting your finger in somebody's ears, that seems a little much. But, so go do that. So if you want to lead someone to Christ, give them a wet willy. No, don't do it. Okay. Capitalize on touch. Number 2 is similar. Risk a hug. Just risk a hug. Number 3, have time. If you want to impact somebody, just have time for them. So when they say, hey, what are you doing? Make extra time for those who are you're trying to impact. Number 4, share your life. In verse 8, after Paul says, so we cared for you because we love you so much, we were delighted. Ponder this, folks. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. So share your apartment, your house, your thoughts, your joys, your celebrations. Include them in challenges. Share yourself with them. 3 more, spend your money. Pick up the check. Be the generous one in the group. Number 6, respond quickly. If a lost person, a person who doesn't know Jesus, reaches out to me, I do well to respond to them right away. It just shows my eagerness to help. Respond quickly. Last one is pray for them. Just pray. Because you and I both know, right? We will not be perfect at this evangelism stuff. We need the Holy Spirit to open their heart to the gospel. I spit out a lot of stuff there. Hopefully that's helpful. So to recap, evangelism assumes opposition, authentically presents, it doesn't flatter and isn't greedy, and it cares deeply. There we go, Bible student people. Next week we're going to continue in chapter 2, and so if you want to read the rest of the chapter, I think the title of Bible time next week is going to be The Struggle is Real, and we're going to look at how Paul made it through such opposition with spiritual health and vitality. So I think that will be helpful. Until then, have a great time reading your Bibles, folks. Enjoy it. See you later. Bye.